Welcome back to Team Talk from Team Kinetic with me, Chris Martin.
And me, Imo Greatbatch. Team Talk is the podcast that dives deeper into the world of volunteer engagement, getting to know the people who volunteer or help make volunteering happen, why they do it, how they do it, and what they want to see change. If you're new to listening to the podcast, welcome. And if you've listened before, big welcome back.
Welcome to season 3 of the pod. As we continue on this journey, we're going to continue to follow the themes of the Vision for Volunteering. And this season, I think it's one of my personal favourites and one of the most interesting. We're looking at the theme of power and its role across volunteering and the voluntary sector.
And today's guest has had a unique vantage point of how power can play out as a professional and volunteering environments coming together. He can talk firsthand about when these come together well and when things don't quite work out as our governance structures would like. Having celebrated 50 years before Christmas, I'm hugely proud to invite Ian Braid as our guest today. Ian, welcome to Team Talk.
I thank you most kindly. It's great to be here.
Ian's work as head of sport at Worldwide Sports Insurance provides him with a slightly different outlook, even before he gets started on anything else, of his view of sport and some of the challenges, the sporting environment, some of the challenges it brings. But it's this combination of his professional experience and his long-standing commitment to sports administration as a volunteer that enables him to offer some really interesting insight when we start thinking about power and the role it plays. Ian's going to hopefully offer us some really interesting insight on the challenges that power and the structure of power can play, and sometimes the difficult positions volunteers can find themselves in, and some of the amazing experiences volunteers get to benefit from as a result of those structures. So, Ian, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Chris.
I think it would be unfair to say that your CV is pretty much unlike anybody else that I've come across in the sporting sector. So, would you take us on a sort of a greatest hits tour of your career to date? Would that be all right?
My career as a volunteer or career.
Well, if you sort of take us on that combined journey, because I think that's the really interesting thing. You've had a lifetime commitment, I think, as a volunteer, but you've also had this professional life alongside it that the two intertwine really interestingly and complement each other quite nicely.
Okay, well, we'll do the volunteering bit maybe slightly separately in my entry into it, but I've been volunteering since I was a teenager, but professionally, when I was a youth in Lancashire, I thought I was going to change the world like everybody else did. It took me to Manchester University, where I did some degrees in town and country planning, always with a view to wanting to do something which now is a thing called sustainability. But in 1980, when I got kicked out of the university with a MSc in pollution and environmental control, nobody was interested. So I dragged myself into financial services because it was the only place where I could first get a start, and I stayed there for 20 years, in and out. There were a couple of blips in the career, but I started to combine my professional interest with my love of sport by, in the latter stages in insurance, I was working for insurance brokers or insurers who were insuring the sports sector.
Yep.
So that was good, and my entry into it was complemented at the time by my volunteering in British Triathlon. So you can ignore 1980 till 2000 in terms of interesting career. But insurance got me. I insured an organisation which at the time was called the British Athletes Commission.
Okay.
And again, because of my role in volunteering, this time as a trustee of Sports Aid, all these were sort of complementary and overlapping a little bit. I knew quite a few people and I knew Karen Pickering, who was the chair of the BAC at the time. She rings me one morning and she says, I'm in the cart here. I've just been told by the finance director we've only got 2 weeks of money left. So some financial director he was. But anyway, and this was 2012. So the organisation, the British Athletes Commission, was on its uppers, and it was the members of the BAC that made this country feel great for a month, because they were all in the London Games.
Yeah.
The British Athletes Commission, now the British Elite Athletes Association, in my time had 1,500 members across 40 sports, archery through to wheelchair, whatever you want, Olympic and Paralympic and Commonwealth. So they made the country feel great. The organisation was bust. So effectively, and don't tell too many people, I became a shadow director for a while, which eventually, on the day I emerged from a hospital in Haywards Heath in Sussex with a new right hip, was the day UK Sport confirmed that the BAC would have funding for 1 year in guarantee, 3 years in principle, and had a list of T&Cs to fulfill. Well, I was going nowhere because I was done, and I was done in financial services. That was it. It was done with me. I was done with it. So I became the CEO. And that was a very challenging, rewarding and fulfilling 5 years. It eventually caused me to have a breakdown. Ian, you've had 5 years of vicarious trauma, said my psychotherapist at the time. And as part of the recovery of that, whereas I thought I'd got the well-being of athletes as my purpose, clearly it wasn't. But I talked to people about my mental health, see other CEOs, other performance directors, etc., etc. Ian, I know 6 people like you. Ian, I'm on 5 pints a night. Ian, I'm on 250 milligrams. And I thought, who's looking after the people looking after the people? Because I hadn't. And maybe there's something else to be done. And lo and behold, listeners, DOCIAsport was born, and here we are 7 years later.
It's a pretty punchy intro, Ian. And I guess there's a lot that we can unpick as we go through these conversations. You talk very much about insurance meeting kind of sport through that link with the British Athletes Commission. Tell us a little bit about the journey and the DNA of volunteering. How did you get into your triathlon role, and what gets the old heart ticker going when it comes to giving your time to sport?
Well, I take you back to, I'm going to take you a long way back. I'm going to take you back to 1974. My father worked in travel, so he worked on a Saturday. So my mother, known as the chief, was she was in charge of me and my sister, and I was a grotty older brother to my sister. Used to wind her up, wind my mother up, the whole thing. So my mother kicked me out of the house one sort of August Saturday. Get out, don't come back till tea time, wait till your dad gets in, all of that malarkey. And I'd seen an advert in the Fleetwood Chronicle, which is where I lived for the first 18 years of my life, wanted people to help repair the clubhouse for the new season. So serendipitous, I don't know, but I drifted up to Fleetwood Rugby Club, and I opened the door, and of course there were the sort of the seniors, the elders of the club in there, the people that make the world go round. Alan, Wiz, Wilson, Bill, Snazdell would be 2 I remember, playing on a portable Dansette record player was Karen Carpenter singing Goodbye to Love. I mean, I really remember it that vividly. And I walked into the clubhouse, and Snaz said, what are you doing here, Ian? We're not training today. And I said, I know, Snaz. I've seen the advert. I'm here to help. And that was my first, so that was my first day volunteering in sport. I became the Colts captain, because I was also the captain of the grammar school rugby side. So that was a bit of a recruitment and retention of, et cetera, and off we go. There were rugby roles of note, but critically, an IMO talked to the point about triathlon, and there's a great phrase I have which comes from this little story. I I was in this sort of transition between insurance and sport, making a few mistakes and making a few quid and losing it again and da-da-da. Anyway, I ended up working for this boutique consultancy called Affinity Solutions. I was a consultant. I had to get business in. At the time, my rugby career had finished, and I was I transitioned from journeyman rugby player to journeyman triathlete. Anyway, I cold called the CEO of the British Triathlon Association. I think, well, he's got a group of members. What can we do? You know, he needs my professional help here. So I ring this bloke, Norman Brook. You don't know who I am. I'm Ian Braid, number 6789F. This is what I do. Norman said, quote unquote, everything's worth the price of a cup of coffee. Now, this is 2004, right? So I don't even remember whether Skype was a thing, never mind anything else. So if you were having a cup of coffee, you were having a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
And I went into town into London, and Norman came down from Loughborough, and we met at the Cafe Ritazza on Victoria Station, right? There should be a plaque. And I got myself all togged up, and I gave him my best professional spiel, and he said, nah. He said, we don't need any of that, but we need people like you. Oh, yeah. I want you to be the secretary of the Southeast region of the British Triathlon Association, because I've got a problem. I've got 9 regions. And if I haven't got 8 in 18 months' time, my funding goes. So I want you to sit on the committee, and I want you to give me a merged South and Southeast region. Now, I didn't know the square root of bugger all about any of this, right?
Yeah.
I'd never done any governance, never done any whatever, but I went with it, right? Yeah. And you forgive me because there's a nice little anecdote here, because this is about a volunteer. There's a brilliant woman who was the chair called Nina Ford, sadly no longer with us. But she was what epitomizes the role of volunteering in sport. Chair of the local region. She was a race marshal. She was a coach. She was yada, yada,
Every
yada.
weekend there.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was just she epitomized, if you didn't have volunteers in sport in this country, you wouldn't have any sport. Uh-huh. Nina was a rock. So I rock up, become the secretary. we get to approaching the annual general meeting of the Southeast region of the BTA. Can you imagine how popular that was with the triathletes? I think 2 was a quorum. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
Anyway, Nina says to me, Ian, we've got this AGM coming up. What do you think? She said, I'm very happy to stand as the chair again, because everybody likes the cakes I bring to the meeting. And I said, Nina,
the best kind of volunteer.
Yeah, I said, Nina, you're absolutely right about your cakes. They're absolutely bang on. Listen, why don't we swap roles? Why don't you become the secretary, write the notes? I'll become the chair. Are you sure? I said, as long as you bring the cakes, I'm in. They got their 9 to 8 regions in 18 months.
Yeah.
And I walked away. And I walked away then because I didn't know what I know now about governance and things, but it just didn't smell right. And I had all sorts of people coming down and taking me out for lunch and bloody blah. Oh, Ian, we want you to stay and do this. And I walked. I became, and again, there's another anecdote here, so I'll cut it out. But my son was starting to play rugby, the famous Harry Braid. And I was getting back into rugby again, and I did a long cycle ride, Le Tap de Tour, and I raised money for rugby's charity for disadvantaged children and young people called Wooden Spoon.
Yeah, great charity.
Thank you. And at the time there was a Sussex and Surrey region of Wooden Spoon. President John Inverdale, who I'd played rugby with at Esher, my daughter's godfather and vice versa. Anyway, 4 of us raised a pile of money for Wooden Spoon, and our stipulation was it needs to be a project in Sussex. There were no projects in Sussex because the board were all Surrey and all met in the Bear in Esher and never went south.
Okay.
Anyway, long story short, or long story long, sorry, they lost the checks because it was no just giving, it was checks. Lost the checks. Ian, we're glad you've rung up again. We're setting up a separate region Sussex, are you interested? Well, I want my bloody money spent. Yeah, I'm coming down. So I went to this meeting in Hove, and here's a lesson for all volunteers, right? When it gets to election of officers, do not go to the loo. I went to the loo. I went to
Love
the
that.
loo. I went to the loo, came back out, and I was the bloody chairman.
Yeah,
The
that sounds about right. That sounds about
the
right.
So we went from, in my 3 years as chair, we went from not even being a thing to being in the top 5 fundraising regions in the country for the charity. But it would be, there were some brilliant people on the committee, but for them, it was a lifestyle thing for them.
Yeah.
So they were in, until the undertakers came. But for me, I'd sort of set it up, and it became a turnkey solution. We knew what we needed to do. We knew what we were doing, and we raised, tens of thousands of pounds each year. I'm selling insurance in sport now, and I'll go to Loughborough because that's where
That's what it's all about.
that's where they all think it takes place. But Imo and I know it comes from Manchester University, really. So I'm flogging insurance, getting the sandwich. I'm getting the sandwich to come out, to get on the bus, to get to the train to go home. And that guy, Norman Brooks, in the Refect, Ian, I was just about to ring you. No, you weren't, Norman. I haven't spoken to you for 3 years. What do you want? Oh, well, we've professionalised and we're not the BTA anymore. We're the British Triathlon Federation, and I was going to ring you because I want you to be the major events director. Oh yeah, we've got JDs now. All right, great. Have a look at this. Major events director. The job holder will have been in a major event, or he'll have organised one. I said, you can have this back, Norman. None of the above applies. No, shut up. I want you to meet the president. And I met this fantastic woman, Professor Sarah Springman, and I became the major events director. Learned a hell of a lot through that, and maybe there's lessons learned in a lot of that. I did that for 2 terms of 3 years because they had terms of office now as well.
Yep. And was that a paid role, Ian, or was that as a volunteer?
All I'm talking to you about now is volunteering.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. I just wanted to check. That's a big job. That was a big job.
No, it was a big job, but it was just brilliant in terms of what I learned, who I met, so on and so forth. Then 2 terms. I went from knowing the square root of bugger all about major events to being the chair of the steering board that delivered the World Triathlon Series finals in 2013 in Hyde Park.
Fantastic.
So loads in there. 2 terms and I'm out. But by now I'm in the BAC, the British Athletes Commission.
Yep.
I didn't want people to feel I was conflicted by my role as a director of an NGB when I'm representing athletes. And I also I'd been dabbling with this charity called Sports Aid, been doing a bit, which sits at the entrance to the talent pathway.
Yeah.
And I became a full-blown trustee, again as a volunteer, which I did for 10 years. I finished last year. So yeah, I suppose there's your highlights package in a 5-hour cut down, which I really apologise for. But
it's lovely. I think it gives a real sense of the depth of experience you have had. As I said at the opening, I don't think I've met anybody with quite the same CV as yours. It's quite unique in its breadth and depth, which is why we wanted you on the show.
So we've got 2 real parallel journeys that you've talked us through: the life of your job, and then the kind of role descriptions that emerged to quite senior role descriptions through the triathlon one and event director roles. At what point did you start to see the 2 complement each other, or start to feel any potential conflict of the 2? You talked a little bit about the time of the BAC 2012 and 2013. Was that the time where you could see the value they could add to each other, or the conflict they could create for you?
I think the first thing I'd say, Imo, is I began to realise, I don't know when, but certainly, I don't know, I can't put a year on it, but it goes back a long time. But I know that if I hadn't had that cup of coffee with Norman, I wouldn't be talking to you today. And I wouldn't be talking to you about that loosely described journey. So I mean, there were a couple of things, weren't there? I mean, clearly guided by my heart or my soul or something, or certainly by my values, although I probably couldn't have expressed them eloquently at the time. But I knew something was wrong in the way that BTA in 2004 was being run. It wasn't for me, and I walked away. I didn't want to be a part of it. So I recognised that then. I clearly recognised, as you say, Imo, I mean, I was done at the. It was a huge privilege to be that major events director in that period, because we got into the World Series, we got into the World Triathlon Series. That was a big role I had to play in that. I chaired the steering board for the World Duathlon Championships in Edinburgh. We had the test event for the London Games.
Yep.
We had the London Games when the Brownleys excelled and the world of triathlon pivoted
it was a real
overnight.
explosive point for triathlon at that point as well. The
Yeah,
sport was
yeah, cause and effect, right? And then I chaired there was nothing else for me to do in triathlon in terms of, I knew I couldn't be a director of British Triathlon and the CEO of the British Athletes Commission. There was also another role I did, which was, I only did it for 6 months. And I thought this was it. I thought in terms of volunteering, I'd arrived. I became the independent director for Sussex Rugby, which I'd done a lot of work with Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson on her review of duty of care in sport, which again was a privilege. So duty of care in sport was in my head, rugby was in my heart. The aforementioned Harry Braid sadly had a very bad, well, he'd had 2 concussions playing community rugby, self-diagnosed his recovery, and it took him 2.5 years.
Wow.
So the whole thing about duty of care, rugby, Harry, I'm going to be we went through due process and I was appointed, and I resigned after 6 months because I remember talking to club representatives at a meeting that I'd given up a Sunday morning for, and I was talking to them about, we have to change. We cannot be men's rugby clubs that offer women's rugby. We have to have equal opportunities and grow the women's game. And I was looking at this. Many of the
how that conversation went. Yeah.
Well, many of the people, most of the people looked like me, Chris, right?
Yeah.
They were looking at me like I was speaking Swahili.
Yeah.
And I thought, nah, I'm giving of my time voluntarily here. I'm going to do things voluntarily where I feel I can push at a door and walk through it and try to start or influence change. So there was another conflict there, Imo, in terms of the culture in which I was working, which is nobody's fault. It just was what it was, right? But
You're finding a lot of tradition.
Yeah, and if you are volunteering and what you volunteer for a number of reasons, I guess, and maybe we might talk about that. But certainly banging your head against a brick wall is not one of the reasons why you volunteer. So
some people I think do, but yeah.
But it's interesting. It's almost like you knew the next question was coming, Ian, around motivations in volunteering. You talked about, well, the chief almost nudging you into an opportunity because you needed to get out of the house and do something constructive. Great woman. And then you also talk about your leadership kind of appetite through being the Colts captain and that side of thing, those qualities emerging. You've also talked about in the British Athletes Commission when you thought you were doing it for the athletes, but actually this kind of growing need of looking after people and the people behind the people. So I guess my question is, what do you feel your motivation is and the causes that have got you closer to these different roles in volunteering?
There's a third episode coming here. I've been doing some work with somebody, a brilliant guy called Richard Hosseini, who you would sort of generalize as a life coach, but he's better than that. And I've been doing this work over the last few months, and we've talked about purpose, and we've talked about legacy, and we've talked about values a lot, right? And where I've got to, and this is all developing all of the time, this is almost like live theatre. The last little nugget of this only came on Friday lunchtime over a very acceptable glass of Rioja.
All the best thinking is done.
Well, indeed. I'd got to a point where, Richard had said to me, "Well, what's your purpose, Ian?" "Well, my purpose is DOCIAsport." "Now," he said, "it's not that." I said, "Well, go on then, smart ass, as I'm paying you X pounds an hour. Tell me what my purpose is." He said, "Your purpose is to gather wisdom, and you have to get to a certain age to have a bit of wisdom, I suppose." And I sort of quite liked that because it wasn't ring fenced by a corporate boundary.
Yeah.
But where it came to was a talk with a really great friend of mine. I have this concept which Imo knows and shares about having a personal board. And I had this glass of Rioja was with a personal board member of mine, and he said, he said, "I get that wisdom bit, but actually, what your purpose is all through the different things you've done is helping people." He said, "You might not have looked after yourself as well as you might," which is, a moot point and one that I can't argue with. But that's what it's been all about. And it's like all of the time, as I get to this sort of autumn stage in my life, I'm putting pieces of jigsaws together to get the final picture to present to whoever I have to present it to. The name, Ian Braid. "What have you done?" "This is my jigsaw." "Oh yeah, you can come in," and we move on. So I think it's about that. I've always, I don't know what it is, but yes, I've always done a number of leadership roles. I was a very astute. The first permanent job I had after my traineeship, when I would go back to life insurance, a very wise man called Peter Spence was my manager. My first appraisal said, "Ian is a great team member as long as he's in charge." They,
Love that.
but I've also learned to be, rather than me, "Oh, I know what we're going to do. We're going to ask Ian because Ian will help us." Well, I sort of emerged a different style of leadership in different roles, whereby some of that is giving other people confidence to make their own decisions and to collaborate and to work in a. There's too many stovepipes in sport, and I've seen too many of those, and I try to break those down. So there's things like that. But I do think, 2007, when I set up DOCIAsport, there's a strap line for it, which is take and give care, which is, if you don't take care of yourself, you're no use to nobody else. And I had to learn that at my cost. And that's also what I try to continue to do. So I do think, even in a director's role, even if it's a governance role, you have a duty of care through deliverance of good governance. If you're in other roles, then it's a combination of your skills, experience, and your values, but it's always helping, I think.
I think from what I've taken away from what you've said so far, Ian, is, in your professional role and in your volunteering role, the job of governance is really important. And I guess my question to you is, as a volunteer existing in that space and having that governance happen to you, or being in that environment where you're being well governed or poorly governed, what's your advice to an organization? What's your advice to an organization that has volunteers as a substantial part of its workforce, to make sure that governance has positive outcomes for them and isn't used as potentially a stick to beat them up with? How do you see that? Because you've had that sort of senior management role, you've been on both sides of that as both the leader and the receiver of good and bad governance. I was wondering what your thoughts are around what good governance maybe looks like, and what organizations may need to avoid.
You make me think of two things immediately. Firstly, this is the Harry Braid show. There's another thing with Harry Braid here. Harry played football at infant school, primary school, because of his peers, but eventually one day said, "Dad, I think I might give this rugby union game a go." "Oh, here we are at Haywards Heath Rugby Club then, Dad." Yeah, we are. And he said something about, "Well, can I just watch this week?" "Yes, you can." So I'm sitting there with Harry Braid, who's, age 10, got a cigar going and a glass of port and reading the papers. And I'm sat there watching it. And this bloke comes across to me and he says, "You look like you used to play rugby." Because I do. And I said, "Yeah, no, I did." He said, "You wouldn't mind taking this group of young kids, would you, for a game of touch while we warm up?" "Well, yeah, okay. Harry, you sit there. I'll be back in a minute." So there, duty of care, so on and so forth. Nobody knew who the hell I was, knew what qualifications I'd got, knew what experience I'd got. They just knew I looked ugly and I was tall and I played rugby, right? So, you think about that in a safeguarding context now,
Yeah.
and you think, well, not only do the kids need protection, but I need protection. So there's, you can see the need for good governance.
Yep.
The thing that's really needed, I think, is balance and context.
Yep.
Because you fast forward however many years you want. I was involved in most of those investigations that took place after the Rio Games about culture and safeguarding and
Yep.
so on and so forth. So I know how grim it was, right? Where there was bad,
We're
poor,
seeing it again
or
at the minute,
lack
Ian,
of
with
with
swimming.
Swim England. No.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So now, but now I'm into I've got my who's looking after the people lens on, right? So you might describe them as volunteers, or you might describe them as coaches, or you might describe
Yep.
them as whatever, right? Or you might describe them as administrators and officials.
Yes.
But anyway, you get to the White Review, which came out after gymnastics, which I'm sure all of your listeners will have heard of.
We can pop a link in the description for people that want to find
yeah, encourage your listeners only to read the exec summary, because that's 35 pages long.
that.
But I read the exec summary, and this isn't good enough. We need to put this measure in place, and that measure in place, and the other measure in place. And my first thought to that was, well, yes, you obviously, anybody that abuses a position of trust,
Yep.
be it in the church, the health service, education, or sport, just, there's no place for them. So that needs to be done. But the measures that were put in place, I'm thinking, well, who's looking after the good coaches?
Yep.
And now, if you want to volunteer your time in sport, I'll take it away from gymnastics. If you want to volunteer your time in sport, you've got to go through any number of hurdles and loops before you get onto the pitch, onto the field of play.
Yep.
You're scrutinized like mad while you're on the field of play, either subconsciously or deliberately. And then when you come off the field of play, you've got even more stuff to do. So you think, just remind me again while I'm volunteering.
And there's a similar pattern in care post Savile. There's a similar pattern in the charity sector. You know that continuing rising of the barrier to entry for volunteers, I think, is a pattern across the sector as a whole. But I think sport, has its own particular story of that, which you've just perfectly described. I think it's a definite trend that we see right across volunteering as a whole, that it's getting. There is, I mean, and rightly so. The barrier to entry needs to be high enough that people are kept safe. But I think what you're alluding to is that balance of it being appropriate and manageable and acceptable, and for volunteers willing to do it, I think is a really
Yeah.
key consideration.
One of my current clients is SIMSPA, which, for those that may or may not know, is I'm going to get it wrong, Chartered Institute for Members of the Sport and Physical Activity sector.
Yes.
And they've got a role which, I mean, basically the government said to SIMSPA, or said to the industry, if you don't sort the Wild West out, we'll regulate. So SIMSPA has a key role in that. And they are talking, and their work that they do, and which I am helping with, and also tying in insurance with it as well, because it's relevant, is about small p professionalizing the workforce and having minimum standards of competence. But they also have this great phrase, which is right touch regulation. I.e., make it appropriate and proportionate to the role.
Like that. Yeah.
And that is not only SIMSPA's challenge, that is the sector's challenge.
Yes.
Because then you might recruit and retain more people, A, in careers, and B, as volunteers.
Yeah.
And Ian, have you seen across your 50 years
all right
volunteering journey, big milestone, should be celebrated, and be proud of it, this sort of appropriate and proportionate sort of right touch regulation. Is there anywhere where you've seen that done really well that we can learn from and take forward?
Well, I think that I sort of sideswipe your question, if I may. I mean, I think this right touch regulation is an emerging thing almost currently now. So I think that is to emerge. I certainly know. Well, people may tell me I'm biased, right? But I've got nothing. I've had nothing to do with triathlon and its governance for 10 years. But I know because Andy Salmon, who was the former CEO of the British Triathlon, who's now the CEO of Swim England, and thrown himself in the deep end there. Clearly, but Andy Salmon has made sure that the majority of his work, or the workforce, their jobs are acknowledged by SimSpert, and the training quals that they go through, the training providers are acknowledged by SimSpert, and that has now been fed into the insurance sector. So, you know, there's a catastrophe waiting to happen with insurance, because in my time when I was doing my thing, there were probably a dozen insurers in the marketplace. It was a healthy and competitive marketplace. But now there's less than half a dozen, and everybody's paranoid about concussion. Everybody's paranoid about safeguarding. If there is no insurer, you know, it's a bit like volunteers. If there's no insurance and there's no volunteers, there certainly is no sport. Yes. So, you know, I would cite British Triathlon because of how they're linking their governance to the need for insurance. British Gymnastics is also turning the ship round, and they have a similar relationship with SimSpert and their insurer, and they are, to their eternal credit, you know, most of the investigations I got involved in, you know, there was some good of them, but we don't know really. Well, here's the review into XYZ. Here's a report with 20 recommendations. Who the hell knows whether those recommendations were ever done or not? But as a consequence of the White Review, British Gymnastics are periodically and regularly publicising the report said this is what we've done. Yeah, and that has got to be a good thing.
Holding power to account, I think, is what we're talking about there. Really,
I have this. You know, I have a number of stock phrases, but another one I have, coming out of the work I did with Tanny, certainly coming out of the result of all those investigations I got myself involved in. You know, my view is sport should not mark its own homework.
Yeah.
You know, we'll see what happens with Swim England now.
Yep.
So I, you know, in terms of regulation and things we can learn from Imo, coming back to that, then I think that they are good. You know, I've sat on some. British Triathlon was a brilliant board to sit on. It was a brilliant board because Sarah Springman led it brilliantly. Yep. And it was about she had us all, start of every meeting for the first 2 years, we all had to cite one of the Nolan principles, just to remind ourselves of what
that's quite hardcore. I like that. I do like that.
It was bloody hardcore. It was good. It was good discipline and good focus. I sat, because I was a CEO of the BAC, I sat as on the board of Sport Resolutions. Again, down to another brilliant, you know, under my time when I sat on the board there, Edwin Glasgow KC, just a brilliant chair.
Yeah.
So some of it is about regulation. A lot of it is about culture.
I was going to say, there's a couple of things that I think have come out of the chat today in which I've been really interested in. There's the power of culture. There is the importance of leadership. There's that ability to be held account. These things all seem to be the right ways to think about, the right controls on power, and the right framework to look at it through. I don't know, Emma, have you picked up on any of sort of other themes that we've sort of seen coming through some of the things that Ian said here?
Well, I know that we talked about the fact that we probably thought there could be a whole series in this conversation. And I guess my big takeaways from listening are kind of, it's how we've listened to your journey, Ian, and it's been a bit of a circle of life in regards to the role of insurance coming in and the sustainability and the story from when you were a young uni student right through to the leadership roles that you've had and the role of insurance and regulation in kind of this cycle of sport today. And I think the critical theme was the purpose, legacy, and values running throughout that journey, and how that's played out. And you can see the trends in your choices and the leadership and the different roles you've had professionally or personally. So it's been fascinating. I guess as a roundup, because we do have to sort of come to a close, and it'll surprise you that I'm keeping us to time, Ian and Chris, because I'm not known for that.
I was going to ask just one more question, Emma, before we started to round up, if that was okay.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's a big part of Ian's journey as well. Obviously you alluded to it earlier before, Ian, about some of the challenges you had with mental health, and again your role as a volunteer in that space, advocating for better mental health within various sectors that you've had something to do with. I was wondering, maybe, sharing a little bit about that side of your life and the challenges you've faced, and how again that sort of fits in with where you are now, and in terms of the way you see the world, having been through an experience like that.
Yeah, well, my decline into clinical depression, general anxiety disorder, and full-on breakdown was very, very incremental, and I couldn't. So I'd forgotten what a good Ian Braid felt like, because the decline was. But I was under an incredible amount of pressure at the BAC, because I was challenging the system, or the system thought I was challenging it. What they didn't realise is I always felt we were on the same side, but they weren't prepared to listen. So yeah, it just built and built and built, and it was toxic. And it was only, I've mentioned a couple of key members of the Braid family. There's another one that turned up in 2017, and that was the day I realised I was ill. Fred Braid came into my life in 2017, who was at the time a 12-week-old soft-coated Irish Wheaten Terrier. He's now a 7-year-old soft-coated Irish Wheaten Terrier, and he was the first dog we've ever had. And he came into this house, and for those that have ever had a puppy, just joyous, chaotic, complete, unstructured.
Definitely back on the chaotic.
And this little dog looked at me, and he was like, "Please tell me the big man doesn't live here, because not only does he look miserable, he smells miserable." And I'm looking at this dog, Fred. I've got chaos in my head. Every time I go out into the world, there's chaos. The only place I've got as a sanctuary is this house, and you've just rocked up, creating bloody mayhem. And I walked out of the house. Nobody knew I'd gone. And I went out on my bike, and I came back a couple of hours later. "Oh, where have you been? Didn't realise you'd gone." "No, I know you didn't. You were concentrating on the bloody dog." "So I think I'm ill. I'm going to the doctors tomorrow, and I think I'm done at the BAC." And I went to the doctors, signed off with immediate effect. Yeah, you fill in 2 questionnaires, one called a personal health questionnaire, which you can score 27 points on max out of 9 questions. I scored 23 out of 27. I filled in a general anxiety disorder questionnaire where the max was 21. I scored 20 out of 21. I was not well. Through my recovery, I became a mental health. Well, then I became a mental health first aider. Then I became a mental health first aid instructor, which was hugely helpful to me, because it's worth this, because you've just touched on values, and I'll come to it. So this bloke says, we have this professional clinician in as a trauma specialist, talking to the trainees. "What types of trauma are there?" "Yes, Ian, vicarious trauma." "Oh, very good. I know, because I had it. because nobody came to the BAC to tell me they were having a great time, right? They were just always in the shit. So he said, no, yeah. He said there can be positive effects from trauma, and I'm thinking, I don't know how you get to that. So anyway, Fred and I go for a walk, and I talk to Fred about it, and I come back and I find this guy on LinkedIn, and I wrote to him just the once, never spoken to him since. But I said, I'm writing to say thank you, because you made me realize there can be positive effects from trauma. I came into the mental health. I came into the BAC as who I am, a white, I suppose, middle class now, but was certainly working class, educated, white, monogamous, able-bodied male, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And that was the lens I looked through life on. However, because the BAC was such a diverse membership, the only thing everybody had in common is they were exceptional at their sport, and the rest was different until they had a problem. And then, as Harper Lee once famously said in To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch, I never understood the other person's point of view until I stood in his shoes and walked around. And I stood in the shoes of people that I wasn't. I stood in the shoes of women, people who are gay, people of colour, people with a disability.
Yep.
And I know people with a disability, but shed loads of ability. And that was a game changer for me. And it made me realize what my values are. So I've continued with mental health. People people pigeonhole you, right?
Of course.
So my locker space says Ian Braid, sport and mental health. And I've used that sort of mental health label, A, to get me some work, but B, once through the door, it's something broader than that. It's not about helping people recover from mental illness. It's about protecting the people in the middle between mental wellness and mental illness, because
it's continuous.
and that's culture, and that's duty of care, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Imo, it was a long answer, but
no, I think that's a lovely answer that summed up quite a lot of what we've covered, I think, today, and your personal journey.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important topic. So thank you for sharing, Ian. I guess coming back to what you shared earlier around your purpose of gathering wisdom and helping people, what would be your guidance for anyone who's listening who may have kind of felt connected to some of the things that you were saying around taking and giving care to yourself and others? What would you say are the key things for them to leave with?
my problem was lack of taking of care, lack of knowing what to do with it. So my key take is always don't bottle it up. Find somewhere safe, someone safe, and they may be professional or otherwise, but to talk it out. I've had for years what I now know as cognitive dissonance in my head, white noise, background noise, the chimp that Steve Peters talks about, right? Ian, you're rubbish, right? Ian, what you doing in high performance sport? You're a bloke from Fleetwood that couldn't give and take a pass, lad. What you doing? You have to, trying too hard to prove myself. Well, trying too hard to prove myself always meant that when and if I ever turned round, all I ever saw was, well, you could have done that better, as opposed to, that was a good job, lad. You were as good as you could be. I can't speak highly enough about this concept of a personal board, and you don't have to send letters of appointment. You needn't tell people necessarily that they're on your personal board, but for some they should, and they could be family, they could be friends, it could be a dog. Because Fred's on my board.
Share the board.
No, he's the senior Ned, Fred the Ned.
I like it.
So it's taken me far too long to get rid of this cognitive dissonance, but it's gone because I've worked with others, I've talked with others, I've shared with others. And then when you get to that point, don't think, I thought my mental health recovery after the BAC, I got to a finite point. That hasn't defined me, it's influenced me, and this is who I am now. What I failed to recognize was that actually it isn't an end point until you present the jigsaw at the end of the gig.
Of course, you shuffle off. Yeah.
So therefore, what I'm saying is it's a continuing evolution based on skills, knowledge, and experience, and friendship. So, if people are on your personal board, some may come and leave, but for others, it's a lifetime appointment.
I mean, powerful stuff, Ian. And Chris, before I jump into saying, are we ready for me to round up what I think I could summarize this quite rich 40 to 50 minutes of conversations in the context of vision and volunteering power? And then, Ian, we're going to come to you before we finish for our two from you. If you want to ponder your one word from your professional work and one word that sums up your volunteer world. So I guess the conversation that we've had today has really pulled out the role of family, people, and purpose in the sort of parallel journeys of profession and volunteer roles, the importance of balance and context in governance and supporting how we create a great culture and safeguard. There's been a lot around the people, looking after the people, and the varying roles that people play in community sport and sort of volunteering, and how we really ensure that they're protecting themselves as well as the participants. And then the final one, which was pretty powerful at the end, was the importance of taking and giving care to yourself and others, and the important role that a personal board can play in creating and shaping that. Would that be a fair, I mean, I feel like I've not done justice to the 15 minutes there, Ian. You've given us so much, but I hope that provides listeners with a bit of a roundup of all that we've covered. Anything you'd like to share, Chris, Ian?
I mean, for me, and I'd just like to say a massive thank you for sharing your wisdom and sharing your journey with us. It's been a real pleasure, having this chat for the last hour, and I think it's going to make a great episode. So thank you.
Well, I'm going to lie down in a dark room with a wet towel now because
flight therapy.
Because no, actually, I'm going to go out. I tell you what I am going to do, because it all links. Is I'm going to go outside, and move around a bit.
Take Fred for a walk.
No. I will. The power of these things for me. Well, the critical power is if it helps one person, my work here is done. But also, you can tell I'm in a big sort of reflective space at the minute anyway. So to listen to myself give these answers is also really beneficial to me as well, So I know I can, listeners are listeners. They can't see it on audio, but I can tell you that Chris's and Imo's ears are bleeding. So I thank you. I thank you for giving me the time to speak today.
It's been our absolute pleasure, Ian. Are you going to finish with your 2 from 2, Imo?
Yeah, 2 from you. So one word that you feel resonates from your professional work, the role that volunteers have played within that, and one word from your personal world as a volunteer.
The word in a professional, it might be 2 words.
That's okay.
As a professional working in an environment that it has volunteers in it, I would say sustainable link. Wow. You can't do one without the other. And as a as a volunteer working in sport, I'd say gratitude.
I like that one. Lovely. Nice.
I learned so much per se in each of those individual roles, but if I hadn't done the volunteering, I wouldn't have done the professional bit. Hence the gratitude.
You get that sense coming through the way you've talked about it, Ian. It's been lovely.
I feel quite emotional now.
No, it's
maybe because I've finished.
Massive big thank you from both of us for agreeing to be part of TeamTalk. If you are listening to the conversation, it's triggered any thoughts or wish to explore any further information that we've discussed today, you can visit Ian's website. We'll be putting a link to Ian's website in the pod description. It's DOCIA. Is DOCIA? Am I pronouncing that correct? DOCIAsport? Have I got that
No,
right?
you're not, man. No.
No, I
Schoolboy
didn't think
error.
so.
It's Docia.
DOCIA.
And also comes from...
Explain DOCIA, Ian, for people, because there is a meaning there.
Well, I found out the meaning after I'd given it the title, right?
That's the best way. Duty
of care in action is the acronym, i.e., it's not a 32-page policy on a website that means nothing. It is you walk in the walk, but comes from the ancient Greek meaning good reputation. Check that out. But that's the bit I found out afterwards, right? But never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Exactly. As always, if you have any comments or anything you want to add, you want to speak to myself or Imo, we do read every email. Just email me at pod@teamkinetic.co.uk. Any requests, any thoughts, any feedbacks, anybody you'd like us to speak to in the future, we would love to hear. You can get us on all the Team Kinetic socials, read everything that's sent. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please do subscribe. Please do rate it a 5. If it's not a 5, don't rate it at all. And we'll see you all soon. Take care and thank you.